Thank you. Great introduction, and thanks to my fellow faculty member, my partner in this series, Catherine and Remo. Thank you so much, and especially thanks to all the students. Some of you didn't have an option. But thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to have an amazing speaker. I happen to know Michelle as a friend as well. As a professional, we serve on the board, and she has an amazing journey in wonderful story, and especially this is the Women History Month, so to honor that and having an executive who happened to be a woman of color. So I'm really excited about this. Those of you who are joining us online, welcome, and you can ask your questions in Q&A section. So please feel free to pose the question towards the end of the program. We will open up a question from the live audience as well as we try to keep it online as well. So Michelle, I know your time is to jump right into it. Share us your journey from 2 degrees from NYU to an NYU grad. Well, great to bring that to you.
I love it. I was telling Tariq I wore my book bag today, and I was hoping someone would save me for a student. But yeah, so I did my undergrad and my MBA both from NYU, so I'm quite familiar with the school. And just talking with some of the professors about some of the programs that exist now, it's incredible. We didn't have as much of it when I was here many years ago. But so I am currently the Global Chief Growth Officer for McCann, which is one of the largest advertising agency networks in the world. And we do work like we wrote the line Priceless for MasterCard. I'm worked it for L'Oreal. We work with clients like GM and Smirnoff, and a variety of others. And I've been in advertising almost my entire career. So when I left NYU, I had changed my major probably 7 times. Growing up in a very Chinese American household, I was told I should go and get my accounting and finance degree. Did that for the first 2 years, and then the second half of my sophomore year, I took an advertising management class, and I was like, that is actually what I want to do, because you get to be creative and not though I do a lot of that now. But so I actually started my career at American Express in the publishing division, and I had gotten that job because I followed my parents' direction and interviewed with Big 4 consulting accounting firms. I interviewed with Goldman, and the idea of wearing a suit every single day to work just really didn't appeal to me. So I actually left school and got a job, and I got a temp administrative assistant role at American Express, supporting the chief marketing officer for their publishing division. And I started my career there as a temp, went to the firm, and after a couple of years on the client side, I sort of was like, I'm ready to go to agency world. When I graduated, we were just about out of the .com bubble burst, so agencies were in a down slope and weren't really hiring. So I actually ended up starting my MBA elsewhere. Decided actually the curriculum was not strong enough for me. It wasn't as challenging, so I left my MBA program after semester. And I sort of like threw caution to the wind. It was not here in New York. I was born and raised here, so I said I'm going to interview in New York for either a summer internship, and if I get that, I'll continue on with this MBA program, or I'm going to interview at a couple of agencies and see what happens. And I was offered a role the day I interviewed, which was amazing, over Thanksgiving break. And it was a role called New Business Management at an agency. I had no earthly idea what it was or what I was walking into, but I was like, yes, I'm going to an agency. It was a division that was part of Gray, which is another one of the big agency networks. And on my very first day, we got a brief in from Tariq. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. And my first week, I ended up working till 11 o'clock every single night on this brief, around resources and And as a junior person, had such exposure to the leaders of the agency, and I was like, this is it, this is what I'm gonna do. And I've been doing that now for almost 20 years. So my role at the agency is about bringing in new clients. It's bringing marketing closer to sales, essentially, and how we manage our reputation and talk about ourselves in the marketplace. Building new capability for agencies. So when I started, digital was still a new thing, and we were probably one of the first classes that I wanted to have like official email and computer lab and all of those things. But how do we start to look at these new channels that have changed a lot now? And how do we build new revenue streams from them? So it's really fun. I've been doing it for a long time, mostly because I get to do something different every single day. There's always a new client, a new capability, a new something to learn, and that's driven a lot of my background. Since then, I've been at advertising world is cut into essentially 4 very large areas. I call it my tour of duty. I've done my tour of duty across all 4 of the major holding companies, as well as one of the independents. So it's been really fulfilling, and I still have so much fun doing it every day.
Quite a journey, huh?
Yeah.
So let's talk about it. And you have, this is wonderful that you started out as an admin assistant and probably the thing that you will be making here. You work with FCB, like Gray and McCann. Let's talk about some of the challenges as a leader and what are the things that were really critical for you in the leadership role that you have to apply.
I think I want to say the first like 5 to 8 years of my career, I was very much like the heads down. I will do the long hours, I will put in the effort, and I will put in the time. Was always sort of like the quiet woman behind the scenes. And I think it wasn't until I rose to my first like SVP role that you suddenly learn that the game's actually changed, right? It's no longer about how hard you work. It's about how you manage others, how you bring community and teams together, and how you start to speak up and advocate for yourself. So it was a really challenging time. I think I didn't adjust as well as I thought I was going to. Because when you're rising up, you're always like, oh, if I had that job, I wouldn't have had it too. Because there are some practical things that I think leaders who aren't part of the day-to-day don't see. But once you get there, you realize why some leaders act the way they do, and you start to build that sense of how you manage around an organization, how do you get your voice heard. And when I was coming up, all of the agencies were still run by men, for the large part. It took actually one of my mentors, he took me out for lunch. I remember I'd been kind of working in my role for a couple of years, and he was like, Michelle, I was like, I see you every meeting, you always have something to say. He's like, then you don't say it. He's like, say it to me afterwards. Why are you not speaking out? And I was like, I'm just not. I grew up in a household where you were told, listen to absolute authority. And that changed. And it was like he gave me permission to do it. And from that moment on, it really helped me reframe kind of how I show up in the room and how I speak out and help bring people out.
We are celebrating the Women's History Month and March 8th, we did the International Women's Day. And my opinion is that as long as we celebrate these, we have not fixed the problem. Being a man, I see from the fence, you actually experience that every single day. So let's talk about how challenging it is for women leaders in a corporate environment. I know agencies are very and there are certain roles that they may probably check the box. Things have, in business development, growth, you don't see many women out there. So how do you break the ceiling, and what are some of the challenges that you face that young women sitting in the growth?
So I agree with you. I think as long as we're celebrating these months, there is no Men's History Month because that's history. There's still so much progress to be made. I think that my generation was able to start to help break through for a lot of reasons. I think I have a lot of colleagues and peers across the industry who have stayed in the game as moms. That's always one of the biggest drop-offs when in advertising in particular. A lot of women go, I can't do the hours, I can't do all of it. Once they have their first kid, they try to come back, it doesn't work, and they step back. They shift to a brand role or they stay at home. Strangely, a lot of women in advertising and in real estate, shouldn't be with them. But I think some of it is for women like myself who have somehow managed to get here. I think being open and transparent and talking about it, to show that it's possible. Because a lot of it is just, if you only see men in senior roles who often have stay-at-home wives and live in all pairs, and it's hard because you're like, I can't put in the time and effort. I was really lucky, I think, because of the role I was in. It's one of those unique roles in an agency where you get a lot more visibility, right? If you're an account person or even a creative, there's always multiple layers above you. Growth tends to be what we call overhead at an agency, which means while we help generate revenue, clients don't pay for us, right? So the teams tend to be really small and really lean. And when I was coming up, we actually had a whole bunch of us, we were all at the director level at the same time, of all women who were getting married, having our first kid, and we really banded together and helped each other. And that meant transparency and like, God, I don't know how to handle this situation. My boss wants me to do this. I've got to do daycare pickup. How does that work? And that community now is comprised of the chief growth officers, the agency networks, in New York, which is really powerful. And I think it was that power of like sisterhood and uplifting each other and showing each other that it's possible. I have 3 kids. They are 12, 9, and 5. I travel twice a month at least. But it's because I now know it's possible because my peers and friends have done it and we've done it together.
So you check a lot of boxes of intersectionality, right? I mean, you're a woman of color, and a working mother, 3 wonderful kids when you couldn't see the rest. Do you think it's more challenging, especially, I'm sure you came with Taiwan mom, keeping confidence and challenging. There are a lot of Asian guys, sitting in the audience. How do you overcome, as to the women of color and try to make it to C-suites? What are some of the challenges that you face and how do you plan to even tell me get it?
I think some of it is like identifying and having the self-awareness to know where your strengths are and where they're not. And that comes with time. So my recommendation is always to try new roles, new things. And I think that was a big part of it for me to be able to try different things. When I was sort of overcoming that barrier of like being the hardworking, stereotypical Asian woman in the corner to where I am today, it took a lot of like self-awareness, of recognition of when I was pulling back and when I was leaning in. And I sort of challenged myself step by step, right? So I would say, okay, this week, in every meeting, I'm going to say just one thing. I'm going to get comfortable with it. And it's like pushing yourself out of those realms of comfort that really ultimately help me kind of overcome it. But I think for other women, the challenges are a little different. So like knowing where it is and then having almost like a peer mentor, someone that you can bounce things off of and talk through is incredibly important. Like I'm so fortunate now to have an executive coach who I can do that with. But coming with the ranks, when you don't have that type of resource, having colleagues who are also friends who will be able to give you specific feedback on how you're perceived and whether or not you want to change that. Because I do think you have to be true to yourself and who you are, right? It's not, don't go into your role being like, I'm going to act like the male leader because that's who other people respect. How do you build that same respect for yourself, but do it in a way that's really true to you? And then knowing when in an organization it's not right for you to be thinking. Because I think sometimes we also push ourselves because we're so afraid to change. So when you stay in a role that you're like, I'm not learning anymore, and there aren't ways for me to continue to develop, it's time to move on, and I'm going to be.
So let's stay on this topic for a minute, because there, diversity you can see in this room, and anybody who's famous for that. The part of the Asian culture is to be more polite, quiet, especially, classroom environment. And I always say that when you go into a meeting, if you're a woman, you have to enforce your idea, because someone is going to steal that idea very quickly, and it will become his idea, right? And a lot of us are shy here, not speaking out about the Asian culture, out of respect. What's your recommendation in corporate marriage? If you don't say something, it means you don't have any. So what's your recommendation for those who are sitting down and tomorrow will be in the role? How do they really navigate and come out with those skills of getting participation and involvement and engagement?
I think a lot of it is preparation, to be honest. So I'll always take the little bit of time before a meeting, read up on everything, and so that when I walk in the meeting, I know what my position is, how I feel about specific things, and what decisions have to be made. And because of that preparation, I'll walk in with a point of view, and then I'll find moments where I can insert it. It's tough because as an Asian woman, you have to adapt to Western ideals in terms of leadership and how others perceive a leader. And I've gotten a lot of feedback throughout my career around like, sometimes you come off this really cold, or you come off as like whatever because I'm not participating. So I've learned little things like change body language, lean in a little bit more, etc. And it just takes practice to be in class. Like it's so uncomfortable. It took me 6 months to really get to a place where I was like, I could walk into a meeting and comfortably be like, here's my point of view. And then you want it from there. But I think the expectation of like, let me do something and it's gonna change overnight. Nothing changes overnight. It takes behavior. Again, self-awareness. So like move the needle little by little. And then you look back in 6 months and you're like, oh my God. And now I can walk in a room and typically like people will be like, oh, okay, we should have something to say. The title also helps. So like pushing and advocating for yourself is always a big, thing. But even today, when I started a new role, so I've been at McCann for 2 years and change now. My first couple months, people thought I was the account director coming in to take notes. And it took like me kind of stepping in and going, no. That's not who I am. Let me tell you what we're going to do. And it took time to be comfortable to do that. And even today, like when I walk into those rooms, it takes me a little bit to adjust. I have to feel comfortable, and then I can do it. So knowing that I'll set up a meeting agenda in a way where I'll have someone else speak first, or like little things like that. They're very practical suggestions, but for me, like they helped me immensely.
15 years ago, when we graduated, unfortunately or fortunately, we didn't have leadership courses. Now here, in the SPS, it's part of the program with leadership. And, as 20-something, leadership means something very different to you, right? How do you identify that you have some of those traits of leadership? And what particular traits, maybe resilience, maybe visionary, maybe transparent communication, help you personally in fulfilling your leadership?
I mean, I never thought I would be able to make it to the C-suite. It was never something I thought I was going to do, right? I sort of was always like, I'll get to a good enough salary and I'll just sort of like stay there and I'll be fine. And then you get to a certain place and I would find, you know what, if I just moved up a little bit more, I could have more impact on the organization. And that's sort of how I pushed through for a time. But I think that it's still a tough job being a woman in business. People expect less of you, but at the same time, I think it allows you to push the boundaries more, right? Because if the expectations are very low, and you speak out and do whatever to surpass it, it just gives you more arrows in your quiver, like that saying is.
Now let's talk about, we have a lot of people, environment. In terms of talent, what are some of the key ingredients that's a must for you when you're hiring people and you interview? What are you looking for?
Curiosity. I think the desire to continue to learn is so important in any role. And then I think that curiosity leading to understanding how an organization operates, how an organization accomplishes its goals, be it if you're a nonprofit, it's a different accomplishment than for-profit, right? And sort of stepping back and being able to see the big picture. So when I interview folks, I ask them to tell me about things that they've done, be it a project, be it whatever. And what I'm looking for in an answer is the ability to A, show that they demonstrated curiosity and they're asking questions to learn more. And then B, the ability to then step back and look at the bigger picture in terms of how those questions got to context, how you match answers to context. Because nothing is actually as simple as a black and white, right? Everything we do are shades of gray. So the ability to have overall context, I think, is really important. So I look for things like if you're telling me a story about something that you did, are you giving me, if it was a group project, did you talk about the structure of the class, what the context was? Here were the people that were in my group. Here's how I managed the dynamics. And then here's how we arrived at a solution. Right, so thinking through those things, here are the questions that I pose to my team so that we can move forward. Like those are all really important things that I'm looking for. Specifically though, because my role is very much about connecting the dots across the agency. I'm not a creative. I don't particularly manage clients unless I'm serving as an executive sponsor. I'm not a strategist in it. I'm the one who has to take all of the outputs from everyone and pull it together and find those points of intersection. So those are usually the things that I'm looking for. And I find that that ability to articulate context and then show how it ties together, that drives impact, like those are the things I'm looking for when I'm looking for.
How many of you have a formal mentor? Okay, so let's talk about that because you have. And you know, our incoming generation does not appreciate at times. It's something, the importance of having a mentor, a sponsor, and coach. So let's talk about, you know, how they really help you over the course of reading out to you.
Absolutely. So my approach to mentorship is I like to have, some people call them a board of directors for yourself, but I like to have 3 mentors. I like to have someone who is inside the organization because every organization has its own dynamics and they're always different. I like to have someone who is of the same race and gender identity as myself because again, it's different types of conversations you have with that person. And then I like someone in the industry who's not acting because they give you context and ability to think more broadly. So that's usually sort of like the mentor group that I try to have. Then I have my coach, who is someone who is almost like, think of them as like a business therapist, if you will, because you go to them and you talk through like, here's something that I'm dealing with today. Someone who's really difficult in a meeting, how do I manage that dynamic? And usually I'll arrive at a conclusion on my own, but they help me ask the questions and think through the process. And then the last is a sponsor, which is so critically important. And I think a lot of women just don't have that in business today. That is someone who will stand up and say your name in a room when you're not there. So someone who's going to advocate for you and support you when you're not in the room to defend yourself or advocate for yourself. So, and I'm incredibly lucky, and I think throughout my career, I've had those people, and they change, right? As you rise the ranks, they change, you find new people. I've never done it as part of a more formal program. Sometimes I have, but like, I find a lot of those relationships sort of build organically. And then as you build that throughout your career, because these people sort of come and go to some degree, it starts building your network of like, who can you reach out to? Because everyone moves around in roles, especially in advertising groups. You know, we tend not to have long tenures. So as people move around, it just builds your network, to help support your next move over, here.
My rule is, mentorship, have one and be one. It's very important. You talked about the nonprofit world, and that's how we connect and serve the nonprofit world. Talk about the importance of serving a nonprofit, and you don't have to be waiting till you become Michelle Tang. You can start early on. So let's have a discussion on that.
Yeah, I think giving back to your community, whichever one it is, be it your school, your neighborhood, et cetera, is so important. So as Tariq mentioned, we both sit on the board for Ascend, which is an Asian in business, Asian professionals in business, nonprofit organization that helps advance the Asian agenda. So I do a lot of work in because I think it's so important. It gives you exposure to things that you don't see in a day-to-day basis at work. Because it widens your aperture. Like, because I've been in advertising for 20 years, a lot of our partners at Ascend are in that. And it just gives me always, like, I walk away from every meeting with like a different mindset. Like, oh, like that's a different way to think about something. And that is, for me, super helpful. I do a lot of work with an organization called Gold House as well, which advances Asians in media, right? So they were behind things like Everything Everywhere All at Once or Beef, etc. And that gives me exposure to what are we doing with representation, more broadly speaking in culture. I also do a lot of work locally with my kids' school. I mentioned I have 3 kids. They are 3 kids in 3 schools. So I've got middle, elementary, and preschool. And I do a lot of work within the school community because it makes my kids happy. That part of it. But the other part of it is it gives back to the community because we live in actually a quite Asian district. And a lot of the kids are doing what I had to do when I grew up with immigrant parents. So the kids are doing things like helping their parents translate things from school and like all of that. So because I'm able to, I spend a lot of time with TAs, et cetera, to help raise the bar for the school as well, because I've gone through that myself. And I think it's incredibly important because you never know who you're going to meet in any of these things, be it for personal friendship or professional networking. And B, it keeps a tab kind of on what's happening in the next generation and different part of the business world for me. And I always find it really enriching because I think when you get to a certain place in your career, you're like, I'm pretty comfortable with what I do and I know how to do it well. But having that additional perspective helps you to keep learning and keep growing.
Well, work-life balance is critical, especially for a lot of three. I say that learn how to say no, right? And so share with us, how do you balance this? How do you go to these PTAs and, how do you manage that work-life balance working with larger?
I mean, it's all trade-offs, right? So it's if I'm not able to take this, it's because of that. And I think that's also taught my kids a little bit about trade-offs, so they sort of understand the concept. I think as a mom, I'm very vocal in the office. Like I'm not leaving the office every day at 5:30. It's just not possible. But when there are important things, I say it out loud. I mean, our little CEO doesn't actually. So he's always like, oh yeah, you have to go do that and you have to be a mom. I think, however, corporate culture is shifting because there are so many more moms in the workforce, and different types of families in the workforce that it is much more understanding to some degree. But that said, I think we have to continue to talk about it. So I'll give an example. Like I was a mom who breastfed all of my kids. And when you travel for work and you are breastfeeding your kids, it is the absolute worst experience of the planet. In one of my roles, I was probably 2 days into the job and it was CES. And I had to go to meet with clients and meet people. And CES at the time was cleaned. There was nowhere to come anywhere. And my very second day at work where I just met all of these people, I had to be like, excuse me guys, before you leave, I'm just gonna step over here into the restroom. I have to pump for my daughter. And I need you guys to wait for me to be part of it. 10 years ago, that would not have even been possible of a conversation to have. So it just shows me how far we've come, and I think as long as women are representing the balance of their work and life, right, it's really about integration, and they're comfortable speaking about it, it makes a world of difference, because then everyone behind you feels like, oh, it's okay for me to do that. So most of my team, are parents, both, dad and moms. And we have a very balanced view, so and we're a small team, right? So it's like, hey, I have to go do this for my kid today. That's fine, you do that, we'll cover, but next week I've got this thing. And I think just having that open conversation makes such a difference.
The generation that entered the workforce 2020 beyond post-COVID doesn't have much of a concept of an office space that is outside your home. And some of them are very resilient and pushing back. What's your take on working remotely in connection there with the office?
This is like hot topic all of it. So we are at McCann, we are in New York. We probably get that. McCann in New York is in the office 2 days, officially. Now, with my team, do I require my team to follow that exactly? No. But everyone on my team actually loves being in when we're all together. So we find the right days and the right times. I think for those who graduated during the pandemic and have never sort of been in that environment at first, it's like, God, I have to get dressed. I have to show up in the office, and it's just this like really tough thing. What they found, I think, over time is my junior teams, they are in more than the rest of us, because they found community with each other. They find that they actually learn more when they're together. I'm a little old fashioned in that when we do a presentation, I can't do it on Google Slides with, like, let's click here and then click there. I'm like, print it out, put it on the wall. And when they start to see that magic come together, when you've got all the right people in the room, like they actually think learn more. And now I think the most junior on my team, she's probably been with us 6 months. She's in probably every morning, there's like a text change within my team, who's going to the office today. And if there's a couple of us going, most of the time the whole team comes in. And it's really funny because right now in our building, we have sort of like our own areas, and my team is rowdy. We're all talking all the time, we have music playing, it's a thing. And but we have so much fun doing it, and they enjoy it, and we all enjoy each other's company. To the tune where my CEO, who sits up 1 floor above us, he's like, it's so quiet up here. Nobody's in the office. And now they want to move us up there. And I was like, look, with all due respect, we are going to annoy the hell out of you if we're up there. And he was like, it doesn't matter. It's that energy that everyone kind of misses. And that's sort of the beauty of it. So, it works for us. I do think having the remote days help, because those are like, we now all have like, these are our heads down focus days. And you have to write stuff and like do the work. You do that. But we have very clear like convergence and divergence points, which kind of flow for us really, really easily. And even now, like we're traveling together just so that cross offices can be together for workshops. And it just builds the culture. Because otherwise I feel like it's just a job. And one might enjoy what you do. It does get a little lonely and you're sort of, on your own, but having a team together that really feels like a team, that's what makes it so magical.
Yeah, my advice to people is that the world is changing very fast. And I talk to all of my students that you want to be unique. In a job interview, just mention, hey, if the company requires me to come 5 days a week, I'm leaving. And that alone will really stand you out. I've spent 30 years of my life working, and it's not a bad place. If you want to be in C-suite, it is practically impossible to be a completely remote leader unless you really touch it with people. So again, I'm not anti-remote working, but it's very important that you are flexible in terms of the works.
It's also we're living right now in a fairly constrained business environment, right? So what that means is raises and promotions don't come around as easily. So when that happens, understanding that while we're not graded on in the office, when the raise pool goes out to your CEO and he's looking at the list, if he knows who you are, way higher chance of a promotion or a raise, right? So that's just part of it. It is that face time and that connection point, that makes it.
Yeah, most probably, so it seems to be leaders, obviously. Before we go to the Q&A with the students, you and I talked about this before, is that what are some of the new trends that you're seeing in the marketing world, especially with the artificial intelligence? And yesterday, I was just looking at the store, a new company that is making videos out of your text. And it's doing great work. And I said, oh my God, just think about what did we have to do to production values to create those. So the world is going to change rapidly. From the agency perspective, as marketing partners with some of the largest companies in the world, what are some of the changes that you've seen, and how can these people can be a part of leadership? You know, helping these companies adapt and be flexible to humans.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two specific things that at least I've got my mind on. The first is AI, because I think everyone's talking about it. And I think there's a lot of news headlines that are like, oh my God, AI is going to take over all of our jobs and all of our lives and all of that. The truth is, I think there's still the human to human component that changes the dynamic when smart people come together and solve problems. So I personally see AI as an enabler versus a replacement, right? So I think learning how to leverage it to make you more productive or more effective is incredibly important. So as an example, one of the things my team gets to do is we get to respond to an RFP, which is a request for proposal. That's when a marketer goes, hey, I think I need a new agency. The first thing they do is they go out to a bunch of agencies, they ask a whole bunch of questions, and they want us to send stuff. What clients don't realize is every one of those things tends to be very curated and custom built, because you want to show the clients A, that you care, B, that you can do it, and C, that whatever you're showing is really good. So my core team would get stuff. Well, oh, I think we answered this question 6 months ago with that thing, this thing, right? And it would be a torturous 72 hours like hunting down. We've since implemented an AI library where we have our own closed system ChatGPT, where we've vetted all of our things. Throughout that process, my team learned how to train the chatbot and now how to prompt it and use it so that we can actually get initial output. Is it exactly what we submit? We're not there yet, and I think AI will get there, but it gets us really close, and it eliminates that part of their role where they're like spending time looking for things versus thinking about what is the right way to position us, right? So AI as an enabler. I think the other thing we're seeing a lot more of now is around sustainability, right? So advertising in itself is not particularly a non-sustainable industry, meaning we don't have a lot of things that levers to pull other than pulling back on travel. But the rise of AI is actually causing our sustainability metrics to come down because we're just using so much more technology to power it. So like, how do you balance the two things, especially in an industry that has for its entirety been about human talent? So those are some of the things that we're grappling with. The good news is I think because everything is so new, there's a lot more sharing cross competition than there used to be, right? So people will say, hey, we're doing this, or hey, we're doing that, and it sort of helps to shape how the trajectory of either of those sets of trends to move.
Our last question before we go to the students. What would Michelle be doing differently than the role that you know today? You're sitting, you know, as a 25-year-old, or early 20s and mid-20s. How would I take it?
I think the big thing for me would have been finding more confidence in myself earlier on. Because I think I've always walked into rooms and go, oh, these people have done this for way longer, so they know better. Recognize that it's not true at all. And I think especially, I have so much faith in your generation because I think you have problems, I really do. Bring that energy and that enthusiasm and that curiosity and bring what you know to the business environment. Because I think corporations are starting to change more than they ever have. You see it on the client side, I see it on the agency side. And it's the infusion of energy from your generation that actually is changing that. And I wish I had so much more confidence in myself to speak up and lean in more when I was a junior, or when I was starting out. But no, I love doing these talks because I think Gen Z is going to change the world, and I'm like so here for it.
We have a lot of research to do.
Yes, that's true.
And they're smart. Okay, so let's open up for Q&A, and those online, you can put your questions in Q&A. As the audience, please stand up, say your name, and ask a question.
Hi, my name is Ekta. I am in my second semester pursuing MS in Integrated Marketing. Thank you so much for sharing this valuable insights. I guess my question is, in a world which is rapidly changing and dealing with data, how do you make sure that the campaigns you align on to work with still have that creative element while you're targeting your audience?
It's such a great question because I think especially during COVID, what happened was everyone ran back to performance. Everything had to be rooted in data. And if it wasn't targeted at a specific person, a specific message, it wasn't valuable. What I'm finding is a lot of CMOs are starting to come back to brand building. Because what happens when you commoditize on data is everyone sounds the same, so you no longer have any brand differentiation. The trick now, I think, is finding the right balance for each particular client. And I think it changes depending on the type of business you are and the type of client you are. But that kind of shift back into brand building has given me a whole new faith in advertising as an industry because it shows creativity just now applied to different forms. And I think clients are starting to value it again because it's what helps them stand out. Because you can get the right person that you need to talk to, you can find them, you can send them messages, but unless they connect it to your brand and what it stands for, it doesn't work. I think the second thing is consumers are now holding brands more accountable than they ever have. You look at what happened with Bud Light and Dylan Baby. They're holding brands accountable, and I think that means brands have to be creative in terms of how they differentiate themselves. So creativity for sure has actually seen a bit of a renaissance in the last year. And I'm personally really excited about it because it actually now has to blend data in, but data is no longer a big blending thing. So we sort of went from like one place where it was all about creativity to another that's all about data. And now we're starting to find the balance. And I think each marketer is going to do it a little differently. Each brand's going to do it a little differently. But I think by and large, people recognize you can't be on the end of the spectrum. You have to be.
I'm Cindy. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your experiences today. I'm the master in integrated marketing, and on the side, I'm starting my creative agency. And the problem I've been experiencing is a lot of brands are out of marketing strategy. So is that can be also communicated in the market?
So the in-housing trend, I think, does this. It's like clients go, oh, I really need outside thinking, and then they go, but it's more cost efficient to bring it all in-house. But I need outside thinking, so it tends to sort of do this up and down spiral. There was a period of time, I want to say it was maybe 6 to 8 years ago, where everyone was in-housing. So agencies even opened groups to help clients in-house, right? That said, I think all clients, while the in-housing can be the execution work, they still need that outside perspective, and that's what agencies can bring. And it's we're starting to see clients go, I can in-house maybe 60% of my work because it's more efficient, but I need the outside thinking. The other part, the challenge they have is clients aren't built for the creative environments that agency people tend to thrive in. So I've had a lot of folks go in-house and go, oh my God, I can't work on the same brand all the time. It stymies my creativity. Right, so you're gonna see it kind of like go like this. The interesting thing that's happening now is there are some companies that are going back to in-housing and then some who are coming out of it at the same time. In the past, it used to sort of like all follow together, and that divergence has made it sort of an interesting time in the industry.
Good for you to do one more difference. Okay. More questions?
Hi, I'm Sandy. Thank you, Michelle, for being here today. So as an Asian woman leader, do you think that leaders are born or made? And if you're not born as a leader, can you be successful as a king player?
So that's a really good question. I think that there is always an innate part of you in terms of if you're a leader, like there is something that sort of is inside you that is the born part. Whether or not you cultivate that sort of defines if you ascend into a role, right? And I actually think in marketing and in advertising, one of the biggest challenges we have is we don't value individual contributors as much as we used to. So one of the things I talk about a lot with my talent team is there's a lot of people who are phenomenal at what they do. They are terrible leaders. But in advertising, we have a single track. If you start as a copywriter, your goal always is to get to chief creative officer. The skills required in between, agencies don't do a great job of cultivating that talent so that when you get to a chief creative officer role, you know how to manage people. That becomes your job versus doing the work, right? So my personal belief is individual contributors have to be such an important part of everything that we do. And if you're really good at a specialized skill set, you love it, you do it really well, like that should award you the same level of compensation, because that's what it's about at the end of the day, as someone who's in leadership. I think the advertising agency landscape has a long way to go before we start to turn that corner, but I do think at least on the client side, it's starting, on the brand side, it's starting to be a bit more recognized.
So nice to hear you speaking about your experiences related to be valuable. So my question was, with consumers seeking more authentic connection with brands today, how can businesses make sure they connect with consumers that they're seeking?
I mean, I think there's lots of different elements to that, right? I think at a very macro level, marketing can't just be about communications anymore. It can't just be like, this is what we advertise, therefore that is what we are. Because nobody buys that. I think what it has to be though is the brand's experience, no matter what it is. If you're a platform, it's the UX and how customers engage with you. If you are a retail establishment, how the in-store experience is. Marketing has to now stem across all of those things to ensure that what your brand wants to stand for is no longer just an advertising message. It has to be part of the ethos and the North Star of your entire organization. So super macro. I think, when brands screw up with consumers is when they don't follow that playbook and they don't behave like their authentic selves, right? So you can't be a brand that's like, I want to be that over there and I'm just going to tell the world that's what I am, because that never works. I think the other thing that brands are doing better now is taking consumer feedback. And I think that's just because social has forced that as a mechanism. And that consumer feedback now has to help inform. And I think brands get that though, because there are more ways to do research, and all of those things now than there ever has been. It's the brands who sort of like step back and go, no, I know better, that fail miserably at it.
More questions? We have someone had 3 more questions.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you for sharing. My name is Nicole. I'm also from the Integrating Marketing program. You mentioned that, being a leader in this agency role, sometimes it's hard for people to acknowledge your role and your, this significant role they're playing in the agency. So my question is, were there times that you have to really assert your authority to let people know that you're really there and they need to respect you?
I mean, all the time. Honestly, all the time. I'll give you an example. There was, this was maybe just a few years ago. We were getting ready for a very large pitch. That time, it was possibly the largest creative pitch that the industry had seen in 80 years. So it was super important, and it was like one of those, like, we have to win this, all those things. The team was actually a good combination and balance between men, women, we had diversity, like all the things were right. The global CEO of the company walks in, and it's a massive room, so everyone who's going to present to the client and all of the teams supporting them, with a number of women who had just graduated college, they were sort of watching the process. He comes in and he goes, I want to decide where everyone's going to sit in this room, because we were presenting essentially like this to clients. And he starts putting name tags down, and we're all watching. He's putting all of the men in the first row, and he's putting all of the women in the second row. And everyone, I see all of the women are looking at each other going, oh my God, I see that. And nobody was going to say anything because he's the CEO, he's one of those legends in the industry. And that in that moment, I was like, oh shit, if I don't say something, these people are going to show up. So I say, excuse me. And at that point, he had no idea who I was, because I was actually from one of the partner agencies that was running. I think we need to mix it up. I think we need to put it was the creative leader and the strategy leader who were both women. I was like, we need to, I was like, you've actually put all the men, I'm sure it was inadvertent, you put all the men in front and the women in the second row, and he was like, I did. And he changed it. And I had every woman in that room came up to me afterwards. It's like, oh my God, thank you for saying something, because I wasn't sure. And meanwhile, I had my boss at the time, he was standing right next to me, and he just like the dagger eyes of like, if you say something and it goes badly. But in those moments, I think those are the moments where it's the most important, right? Because if you don't speak, if you see something, you don't speak up in that way, regardless of if you're the senior person with the, a new entry, like, those are the moments where the mistake will get made. Nobody will talk about it because people are worried. So you have to be that voice. So when I'm in those situations, very often that's when I'll step in and say, hi, I'm Michelle. I'm the fill in the blank from blah, blah, blah. Just wanted you to know. And we do that, and it gets fixed. And does that mean it doesn't happen again the next time? No, but it's those constant reminders, I think, that help force change.
Well, that leads to asking questions, right? When in the room, should it stop? Any other questions? Yes.
The freedom of my three kids. Yeah, three kids. I have 2 kids. That's the student. And so my question is, like, how to like persist as being a leader of and student battles, people like being mothers, and it's really hard in my all this because you having a baby, it's them, and it's going to pass. So for me, like I would want them to be a problem, but sometimes it's really hard.
I think every woman does it different, right? I will say that. Like for me, I was one of those women who were like, I cannot wait to talk to adults again after maternity leave. And I had my kids during a time when my husband didn't get maternity leave, right? So I was actually incredibly lucky in all 3 of my pregnancies in landing a huge deal while I was pregnant, and I ended up having a baby. That wasn't always the case. I had a lot of colleagues who had children and didn't have a baby, and they were back 6 weeks after giving birth, right? So it's such a challenge. I think so much of it is about the support system that you have around you, and that's the biggest thing. Like we don't have family close by. but thankfully we have the means when I know, like, for example, in June, my husband's job is crazy. He's the finance director for the New York City Council. So New York City's passing their budget. He's crazy. I'm in Cannes because that's the biggest event of the year. And I call my parents in Taiwan and I go, "Hi, Mom, don't you want to see your grandchildren?" And I'll fly you back to business class. I have so many plans. But I think every mom has to make it work in the way that that works inside their ecosystem, right? And I think the second part is secondly as Asian woman. My husband's Asian as well. He's Korean, so he's grown up in a world where he's the oldest son. So he's never had to do anything around the house. And it's my oldest is 12. It's been a 12-year process of reminding him that this is a partnership and he's got to do his part. So, but I think it's a lot of it is the open communication of it. But there are days when I'm like, I remember having to travel once when one of my kids was sick, right? And you're walking out of the house and your 3-year-old, like when they're crying, you're like, oh God, this sucks. But like having the open communication with your partner, with your support system, and with your job. Because there are days when, like, I once did, literally, I was in California for 4 hours. I flew to San Francisco for a client meeting. I landed in San Francisco, and my son's daycare called and was like, he's not flu. And he's just beside himself, you need to come back. You have to come and get him. And I said, well, I'm in San Fran, so my husband goes and gets him, and he was such a little mama's boy, so he's like, no, like, it has to be mom. I got right back on a plane, flew right back to New York. I was on the ground, I went to the meeting, I was there for 45 minutes, said to the clients, I'm so sorry, the rest of the team's got to come here. Flew back to New York, to be with them. And like, sometimes you make those concessions, but like, it's always a trade-off, like, what is the right thing? I will say when I got back to New York, he was like, I don't want you anymore, you weren't here to get me out better. So then I got stuck with him the next day, home with him, and all he did was cry for his father. He's a pilot time. But you know, like it's hard, right? And it's always a balance. And I think you're a little bit transparent about what is going on at home, what is going on at work, what is going on anywhere else. It makes all the difference. Now that my daughter is 12, my husband and I include her in our weekly, like, here's the calendar, here's what it looks like, and she's able to help. So that was always the other thing for me where I was like, they're only going to be little for so long. So I want to make sure I have the time with them, but also like the hard time, it's temporary. Because they're going to get to a place when they're going to be a lot more self-sufficient and being able to see that future. I'm like, I know where we're going. It's going to be okay. So it just sucks today, but it's going to be okay in the long run.
So you find in validating, you know, the main gender is how to please up with their kids. Well, with that, we come to an end, but you could see in our class diversity, and especially the gender diversity, there are very few men, and all the question has stayed, but you know, yes. I want to thank you again, and this is the book that I've written. I've signed it with you. Thank you so much, and